Morningstar Conservancy is an organization that was formed by Native American church people, friends, old friends, who'd been growing concerned over the years, watching the dwindling supplies, watching the shrinking size of the average peyote that we'd buy for church use, noticing that where we used to go and walk in the desert and there was peyote where you could make offerings and pray, there was no longer any left. And it took several years to start getting any kind of traction because originally we were hoping to just preserve ecology. And that has its own hurdles. The amount of land required, the amount of, like, let's say, high security fencing required.
You guys were trying to like purchase parcels of land and do land conservation.
And it's not like that is not still a hope, but in the meantime, a lot of years went by. And we did several trips looking at land, talking to realtors, talking to the locals, dealing with the peyote dealers themselves, the local people. And we never got like a strong signal that, hey, this is your next move. So as I've been raising my family and growing older, all of us have, we started realizing we needed to start a sanctuary now of some sort until somebody can get their acts together, that the consciousness could be raised, that this is a species that needs a little bit of help. Nobody wants to see anybody be the boss of peyote. We just want to see it being given an opportunity to grow. I always refer to this old saying, but it really does pay off in this case, and that is that the best time to plant a fruit tree was 10 years ago, but the second best time is today. And that's a real thing with this medicine, especially when you get on in life. You're like, well, how many more 10 years do I even have? So unless I'm planting seeds today, I'll feel less bad about my children's situation tomorrow.
It's a windy day in the Sonoran Desert. Anyway, welcome to another episode of Crime Pays by Botany Dozen. I'm here at the headquarters of Morningstar Conservancy, a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to the conservation and propagation of Lophophora williamsii, the peyote cactus, which of course is not native to Arizona. It's not native to anywhere else except Mexico and southern Texas and a little sliver of West Texas. But populations used to be rather robust. In some places they still are, but in other locations they are drastically declining. And so the aim of Morningstar Conservancy is to just grow a ton of this for Native American use, for the Native American church, and hopefully give an alternative to poaching, to harvesting, etc. Because there are actually, licensed peyoteros in South Texas that have licenses to go out and cut and whatever, and it's just there's so much demand, and with the amount of habitat destruction going on, places getting cleared to put up McMansions and strip malls, there's just not the population is nowhere near as robust. Look at this is all one plant, very old. Anyway, let's go check it out. Let's see what they got going on here. Here's my friend Leo Marcato, good friend of mine. He's the one of the main people behind Morningstar, who's actually propagating here. And so do you want to tell us what you're doing, basically? Like, what are we looking at here?
Well, so I've been living with mother plants for most of my life. I tend to collect their seed, and I've been learning how to make that sustainable cycle happen, where you're collecting your own seed, and then they eventually produce more seed. We're getting there in terms of my own learning, but it's a pretty simple process. So plants like these during the summer when it's nice and warm will, make flowers all season long. And sometimes I help them out a little bit by pollinating with a little brush. But other than that, they're producing the little fruits, which I don't see any of right now. They kind of slowed down.
Right. So what this is all one individual, you said, right?
Yeah. And more than likely, I've never dissected it, but that's what I'm guessing. Sure.
And you were gifted it when your son was born?
Yep. 20 years ago we were given it. It was a bit smaller, so it's been doing all right. It keeps making new babies. We've cut a few over the years for ceremony for my son, but you can't even tell where our last cut was at this point.
Yeah, I mean, that's massive, and it's in a properly deep pot too. What kind of amazes me is that, I've seen peyote in habitat many times, as have you, and this climate, I mean, Arizona is very different. It's a colder, drier desert than you get in South Texas. West Texas, it's a little bit more akin to, but yeah. Regardless, these plants are doing fine. I mean, you obviously know how to care for them. What's going on with these guys over here?
These are fairly young plants, actually, even though they've gotten a good size to them, you know, they're not small anymore. But when they came to me, they were probably about a quarter size, and that was just over 6 years ago.
Oh wow! So you guys have plumped these up quick. And when you got them, were they cut? Were they cut buttons, or were they?
They were kind of cut, semi-cut, with some underground stem left intact, so easily rerootable.
Mm-hmm.
And they were probably, you know, in the range of this size to this size. Like I say, just about 6 years ago on these biggies over here.
But what's remarkable too is I don't think people realize. I mean, peyote will resprout roots very easily. I mean, you know, I know other NAC members that buy cut buttons and then actually root those. They let the callus dry out and then they root those cut buttons.
I can show you some right here if you don't mind. But they came up with a lot of lower stem because they don't really get cut. They kind of get hoed out.
Right. So
from under the
where
brush.
did these come from then?
Starr County or Webb County. I'm not 100% certain, but they are, you know, licensed with their number, sold to the church. But certain church members refuse to go ahead and just dry these and cut them and use them in ceremony when they're that small. So none of these secondary roots existed about 4 months ago. They were purely the uprooted stems.
Wow, that's cut really low. That's crazy. So I wonder if the plant that was cut
dug
from
up more than cut, like I
right,
say.
right. Because that's not. I mean, what's typically supposed to happen, right? Is they're supposed to cut above the stem, like where it turns green, so that the base plant can resprout.
Ideally, this plant would be this big, like the ones we just saw, and cut right at the ground base. Preferably with a little angle, so you leave a few of these areoles. To start new meristem tissue, I suppose, is what they're doing.
Right.
But even if it's cut evenly at the base and not too low, it will resprout new pops.
This size is a result of the declining populations. Right? I mean,
we have no choice when they're being dug up like this. That's just too small. It's never made a flower, more than likely. You know, we need to leave mother plants intact in habitat somehow. So I'm not 100% sure how to do that, but we also at the same time can't be wasting the little ones we've got. That might have been cut a couple of years back or something.
Yeah, look at it. It's already got 4 heads.
Right.
So, but either way, you're going to be taking these, putting them in soil, rerooting them, plumping them up, and then using them as like you use it as a seed stock, basically, to get more seeds and grow more plants.
This is our initial seed stock. Yep, we want to have as many seeds available for the future as we can. I don't see any other option right now. It's not plan A, it's plan B. Plan A was preserve the habitat, which we've been failing at. But I don't see that there has to be a plan B. Hopefully people will get it together to preserve habitat and seeds will then be available. Right now, if your average size plant that is being harvested is more like this, we're not going to have a lot of seeds in the future. There's not a lot left in Texas. There's a lot in Mexico, thankfully. Mexico's a bigger place. A lot of commercial pressure on the gardens of South Texas because the law is that it has to come from Texas. It can't come from Mexico where there's more wild populations. So what that's going to do is in that small area, that's going to reduce the average size of the peyote when there's no big ones left. And we've been seeing that happen. We went from big ones down to what we're seeing here, well, in my lifetime, in 35 years for sure.
So what's the end game here? What do you guys hope to do with all these plants? Just basically create a sustainable source for NAC use, for Native American church use, or to replant in habitat at some point, or what?
Yeah, both those things. Ultimately, it seems to me like it's also a matter of mass. If you have big peyotes available for sacrament, that's 4 or 5 of this size that you didn't need to cut.
Right.
So there's that. I think there's a potential more than 1-to-1 replacement ratio potentially here. We just can't be cutting them this small anymore. So if nothing else, we hope to return big plants to Texas someday, but in the meantime, reduce some of that pressure by having larger sustainably grown plants available for Native American church use.
These are some of the ones you guys are rerooting, right?
Right. So these likewise have been in the ground up to 4 months. They were all purchased fairly small. You can see.
Oh yeah, those are tiny. Wow, look at that. What is that? Is that just from transport? They got a little bit of rot.
Yeah, they get a little bruise, and then they'll recover.
That'll go away. I mean, you can already see right there the new growth, because that's where the apical meristem is. That's where cell growth is occurring. It pushes out, and then the brown tissue just disappears.
These have been in the ground a little longer. They were pretty much identical to this just a few months ago. So you can see in many cases, I feel that some of these have almost already doubled in size. because they were a little bit shrivelly from being harvested and carried around in bags and shipped, stuff like that.
Right.
So they're a little bit wrinkly right now because it's getting colder and they don't want to hold as much water as they would in the summer. But they're doing pretty well. You can see they're all well established and have nice root systems.
Right, and once they already have roots, then they could just start building that big taproot that makes them so successful in the desert.
Right, once they have the taproot, they're good to go.
Because not all cacti do that, you know. Obrigonias do, which is actually sister genus to peyotes, and peyotes do. But once you see that taproot, it all click. You know, anyone who ever sees a dug up plant or a plant in situ, it's that big taproot is the battery that enable these to deal with their environments, you know, which is so hot. I mean, that's what's blowing my mind. Is South Texas is so much hotter than here. That's what I mean, I stepped outside this morning and it's chilly. It's, you know, there's no humidity to hold that temperature, and it's wild.
This is definitely more like Big Bend here, West Texas,
yeah,
cold desert. These larger plants, they've got a good carrot-sized taproot on them. And if you were to cut one of those heads, you'd get resprouts pretty quickly because of that reservoir. Under the ground
because of that storage root.
That's another reason why you really only want to be cutting the big ones. The smaller ones will have a higher mortality rate. Fewer of them will survive a cutting.
You got some in the ground right here, which is pretty cool. I mean, every plant wants to be in the ground more than it does in the pot, but these are, and plus once you get them in the ground takes longer to dry out than a pot too. But how long have these guys been in there?
These have only been in about 6 months. And I've got many decades of doing these transplants into the Sonoran Desert. So what we'll likely do is, if there's any really chilly nights in the next winter or two, I'll come out and mulch them with leaf detritus from around here, mesquite mulch, just to help them out a little bit. But you know what? After the 3rd and 4th year, we notice that they really do adapt to colder mornings. They get with it. I think that's probably what originally happened with the West Texas varieties. You know, it's a little colder over there, and they've got a slightly different morphology. I believe they probably can handle colder temperatures as a population now.
Is that just thrasher damage? The curve-billed thrashers get curious about them, peck at them?
You get these little birdies when they first come out, and they'll make the occasional peck. But then, you know what? After they check them out, they seem to leave them alone.
Yeah, those plants will be fine too. Yep. I'm just amazed that look at that intense coating of wax on there. That how blue they are. You know, that cuticle is just nuts, man, on that stem. You look at some plants in South Texas, they don't have that. You know, that because it's more humid down there. It's just what an adaptable plant. You know, I mean, that's the sad thing is there's no reason why this should be, you know, being extirpated. You know, locally extinct in some areas. It used to be so abundant. It's so adapted to the desert. You know, it's tragic. It should be way more abundant than it is. Just all the habitat destruction and the over-harvesting, the poaching, etc.
It was fairly abundant when I was a kid. You know, there were still lots of peyotes in Starr County and Zapata County, and it's just gotten very thin in the last few years.
Leo, one thing that's blowing my mind is I always assume, I mean, you know, you get hotter individual days in this climate, but cumulatively throughout the year, it's nowhere near as hot here as it is in South Texas. South Texas has more cumulative days of heat throughout the year. But you're saying some of these get full sun, that southern Arizona sun in the summer. Is that right?
Yeah, eventually we want them all to have some full sun, at least a few hours a day. So depending on your angling of your garden here, these do adapt to the increasing summer sun every spring because they'll get a lot more. Right now they're getting almost no direct sun just because of the way the sun is low on the horizon. But they're not growing as quickly either, so they don't mind it. They don't start to stretch. It's in the summer when it's warm and hot on average that we need them to be getting more light. The one thing that we can't do is during the peak of the sunlight and the heat is churn any of these plants because they adapt to the south side.
Right.
So if you turn them, all of a sudden that's too much light for them.
Right, because they don't have that coating on that side. Same
so they
thing.
do adapt to, I guess directionality is what we're talking about here.
Yeah, and I've seen people too with, cultivated cacti, whether this species or another one, actually burn them if they take them from the shade and then put them in full sun.
Happens all the time. Yeah, even to these it would happen, even though they've adapted to full sun.
And when you look at that, that epidermal tissue, you really get. I mean, look how chalky and blue that is. That is all sun resistance. That is all peyote sunscreen.
Well, I just wanted to share a little tiny bit about my soil mix. My seedling mix is basically a base of pre-mixed materials based on peat moss. But there's also perlite. But what I do is I screen it first, and it just makes it a little bit finer. And you can see basically how it's coming out. I'll add extra gypsum and a little bit of dolomite. And then what I do is I add a fine vermiculite, which I don't have on its own right now, but you can see there's no chunks bigger than this.
Right, and the vermiculite, for everybody watching, is just an inorganic water-holding structure, basically.
Water and air.
Right.
But it holds a lot of water, so I only use it on the seedling mix, and I use it in a thin layer because I don't want it to hold water for too long if it were higher and thicker. So I want it to dry fairly rapidly so I can control the moisture content a little better. So I use a thin mix with extra vermiculite for seedlings. Now when I go to make an adult mix, once they've already got a nice root establishment, it's a little sandier, chunkier, more crushed limestone is in there, a lot less vermiculite. Little extra sand and all that gypsum.
Right, you don't got to worry about moisture so much. Once they're old enough, they've built up that taproot, they can hold moisture.
They're fine after that. But
right.
It's just that seedling stage where I want the new fine roots to develop. I find that a fine vermiculite in the mix really helps a lot. That's my main tip for seedlings. Just don't make it too thick. You don't want it too waterlogged.
Yeah, I know Javier, like when he's growing astrophytums, same thing, screens. He gets that Fox Farm, that stuff the pot growers use, that rich soil, sifts it out, gets the bark bits out because those will rot and cause fungal issues, sifts it out, and then just mixes it 50-50 with pumice, and it works great. But the sifter, you want to get those big particles out, right?
Right. There's no need for them, especially in the seedling mix. The big ones could handle it. But we keep those a little drier overall, you know? They get more dryness in between waterings when they're larger.
Oh, that's rich. Look at that. So this is the adult mix, huh?
Yeah, that's the base for the adult mix.
Go inside and check out some of the seedlings.
Yeah, let's do.
Decor here is just phenomenal. I really do have to say.
Including some Joey Santoris.
Oh, there you go. It's not bad. Okay, so here is the seedling room, and of course you got 8 of these little mini greenhouses, and that keeps up the humidity. Humidity is important for all cactus seedlings. This is a great method for any cactus seedlings, whether it's star cactus or whether it's peyote or whether it's any of the other rare and endangered cactus that are getting both, losing habitat and getting poached really hard too.
So I'm keeping the flaps down at times just for increased humidity and warmth, depending on what's going on. It's helpful.
Also, too, we should mention, if this was summer, you would have those clear plastic humidity tops to them, right?
Right, because otherwise the chambers would be too warm with the ambient heat from the LED strips as supplemental lighting. I don't want to cook them, so I leave the doors open during the summer and put a clear cover on. I can show you that right here. When it's hot, I just keep the room fairly cool, and I individually cover each flat that way.
So what's the ideal temperature for the seedlings? Like 80, 85?
When they're sprouting, they don't mind getting up to 90, and a lot of professional growers believe it's beneficial to drop them down to like the lower 70s at night. So a little bit of variation goes on in here.
But definitely during the day, they need more than like 70, 75.
They're
generally
fine at 70, 75, but like I say, if you're germinating seed, they like that top end of it, So like high 80s generally is what we're going with here.
And so what's going on? So this is that seedling soil mix. Then you sprinkled, what is this, limestone pebbles?
Is crushed limestone as a seedling mulch.
And this just kind of works to hold them in place, hold the seed in place, provide a nice...
It does that, but it also slows evaporation. And one of the things you do when you slow evaporation is you prevent too much evaporated salt buildup in the top layer. Because our water is pretty alkaline in the Southwest, and there are a lot of dissolved salts in it. And if it's constantly evaporating off the top, it's not good for the seedling, both in terms of root development and also depositing salts as the water's leaving. So the limestone actually does support the seedlings, so you don't have to stick in too many roots that don't dig into the soil. Like I use a toothpick on ones that don't quite dig in. But that mulch really helps them point downwards and stay upright. But it also slows the evaporation on the surface, which I really feel makes a big difference as well. The other thing is when you go to water and spray, you're not disturbing a loose soil, because this is a loose soil mix.
Right.
You don't want to dig it up as you're trying to water. So even if I make a mistake and spray too hard, this limestone mulch keeps everything intact.
Yeah, that mulch is really important.
It is important.
It's so funny, too. For a spineless cactus, they sure do look cute when they got those little spines as juveniles.
Little whiskers, yep. I'm toying with the idea of in a 10 by 20 flat, starting out with somewhere about 1,000 seeds, space-wise. I'd have to count to see what our average germination rate is here, but just looking around real quick, it's pretty deceiving in terms of numbers. I would guess there's probably 750 in here, somewhere around there.
And you don't lose too many, obviously, now.
Well, you can lose them after this, but I think the key thing is to get them sprouted. This is not a horrible sprouting rate here. Hopefully we're batting 80%, something like that, maybe 75%. Then we go from these seed flats as soon as possible into a more individualized container like you see here. And we don't have 100% success rate. Just by judging here, I can see we've lost 1 or 2, 3,
and what's
maybe
the
4 since transplanting.
What's the age on these guys? Like, how old are these?
These are ranging from about 6 months to about 11 months, depending.
Oh, wow. So still under a year, though. But some of these guys are plump. Look at that guy. Look at that. Oh, Jesus. That's a beautiful little plant.
Once you get them out of the clump flats and into their little individualized container, they seem to boost a little bit. They seem to have the sense that, hey, we've got our own space now. And I think it's really just putting them in the more porous soil mix, less vermiculite. I think that really helps. It gives like oxygen contact to the roots possibly. And I can water them a little more frequently because it's not a massive soil, you know, it's a smaller container holding less water. And I think there's something to be able to water, let's say every 6 to 10 days instead of having to wait 2 weeks for your soil to dry.
Now, how do you acclimate them to less humidity from, you know, if someone was growing, you know, a bunch of star cactus, say, in like the humidity dome, and then how do you acclimate them to less? Just slowly start taking it off?
How I physically do it is I slowly start taking off the lids if I'm using individual ones. After a couple of weeks, I'll leave it a little askew. So there's a little space on the side for some air entry. And I'm really lucky to have these chambers because one of the things I do is I'll either open them up completely, leave them hanging a little bit for a little ambient humidity, or sometimes, depending on the day, I'll even close one side and just let them air a little bit. So, and then I keep a hygrometer in most of these units, so I'm able to see what's going on with that.
You can see relative humidity,
Yeah, and then once they're established like this, they could pretty much sit open all day. And I'm guessing your average humidity ambient in this room is something like 25%.
And who are these guys down here? Are these
Those
saguaros?
are little saguaro seedlings that I overplanted in a little clump flat. So now I'm going to have to separate them out and put them in their own containers. It's about time to do that.
Oh, that's cool.
It's like I'm torturing them, but they don't mind that much, apparently.
Nah, they'll be okay, yeah. Demonstration for everybody. We're actually going to sow some seeds right now. So, Leo, tell us what we're doing right here.
Well, I'm pre-moistening one of these flats with that seedling mix. I'm going to stabilize a little bit that way because it's pretty light and fluffy when it's dry. So, just want to get a little weight to it. So it's fairly flat, but it's also a rough surface. And I think it kind of replicates the nature world that way. But I believe that the little seeds like to lodge in spaces between, you know, finer and bigger pieces. A little shelter to work from.
Okay, so we're pre-moistening it, and then how do you know when it's good enough? I guess just kind
I
of...
tend to go by weight from experience. I can just pick up the tray and know there's enough water in it. But this is pretty much enough water already. I'll just get a feel for it here. Yeah, I could use a bit more. We're going to give it another spray when we're done. But
So what is this? This is a commercially sourced seed.
right. European folks don't have entanglement of being prohibited from producing seed. So
you get quite a few seeds off your own mother plants though,
yeah,
too, as well.
we do. But it's really convenient to have a ready to go amount here for our purposes.
So let's look at these tiny seeds too, because they're not obviously not like prickly pear seeds. Totally different subfamily of Cactaceae, the cactus family. These are in Cactoideae. They're just these little black, almost kidney-shaped seeds. And if you could look at them under a microscope, they've got a very kind of warty, not warty, but dimpled texture to them.
Each one has a pale dimple. That's what you can see.
All right, that must be the funiculus where it actually attached to the ovary.
And
But then the texture to it is pretty remarkable. If you look at old line, I've got a line diagram that just great shows just this hundreds of those little circular dots in them.
Little space looking creatures.
Right. So anyway, we take these and then how do you sprinkle them in? Dude,
This is going to do your basic broadcast method, and I've done this enough times where I just mentally keep track of where I've been.
You're a wizard of peyote seedling germination.
It's kind of muscle memory at this point. And I spent many decades growing vegetables for market. So I'm using techniques that are very similar to how I would start my lettuce flats, greens, broccoli. And it's a prayer. Always burn some cedar. Always think of the people who depend on the plant itself and what's going on down in the natural habitat. And I try to think of good thoughts. So, there's spoken prayer and there's lived prayer. And I kind of believe that all the words you can pray are good, but they're not as effective as just doing something. So, again, we don't have a lot of language for that in our culture, but to me, every time I plant seeds, I'm literally on my knees, really trying to think about what I'm doing here and having hope for the future. Don't you think that planting any seed is kind of like an act of faith?
Yeah, and it's a great way to bond with, the rest of Earth's biology, too, which we rarely ever do in the society that we live in,
Feels like a drop in the bucket. Even a whole flat of 1,000 seeds, I'm like, what am I trying to do here? There's no hope to reverse the depletion of the native lands and but I can't tell myself that while I'm planting, While I'm planting, it's all like hope. So just do what you can do. This is what's in front of me. And then they're pretty much good to go. So I got that crushed limestone and I just try to put a pretty even layer. It takes a minute. It's worth it. I've done some experimenting, different soil mixes and different mulches. And I've done no mulch experiments. And I have found that I do believe I get better results with this light, heavy on the vermiculite seedling mix. Not too thick, pretty much thin, 1.5 inches or so to start.
Yeah, I didn't know you put the seed in before too. That's kind of cool to see. I think it might be reasonable to assume too that the limestone mulch also helps keep fungus down.
I think it might. And then we're using, by the way, this is a pro tip, we're using pH adjusted water. Our water comes out of the ground here in the Southwest, pretty alkaline, like 8 and above, 8 pH. So what I'm doing is I'm buffering our water to the recommended, and when I say recommended, it's by cactus pros who seem to know, 5.5 pH water. Seems a little acidic. But then we were talking earlier about, isn't that like a way of naturally feeding your plants calcium? Because you assume that acidic water is dissolving a little bit of calcium, a little bit of carbonate, whatever it is.
Right, rainwater.
Every time you water,
right? Definitely. It reacts with the limestone. You go to limestone, like where we were yesterday in the Waterman Mountains, you could see that limestone boulder had rain grooves in it.
Right.
Because it's, the rain reacts with it and runs down and chemically weathers the limestone rock, that calcium carbonate rock, over hundreds, thousands of years. So.
And from what I've been able to see, the plants do like the buffered water better than they like the straight out of the well alkaline tap water. I believe they're taking up moisture and nutrients more efficiently. Just looks like it.
So we should also talk about too, what are regarding the laws too. I mean, Arizona has its own special state law that allows Native Americans to cultivate peyote, which of course isn't allowed in most other places.
Well, specifically, that's not accurate. Specifically, most states do allow some possession and use of peyote for Native American, depending on the state, tribal, or some states just Native American church members without any specific racial qualification. In Arizona, the law is that your possession, use of peyote was in connection with the religious belief and specifically not opposed to public safety, welfare, or morals. That is a defense and prosecution in Arizona. So it doesn't state specific church membership. It doesn't state a specific racial or tribal qualifier. And I guess it's what we might consider progressive in the old use of the term, in that it's very egalitarian. And I think that is the important thing, that if it's your religious belief, I personally don't care what country you came from. I don't care what you believe about God or religion or anything like that. I do care that this is an important plant, and hopefully you'll treat it right when you can. Have some respect and some thought for its future even, hopefully.
And my hope too, I mean, even in doing these peyote, but it's just this, there's always that gateway that someone has to caring about other plants too, that aren't psychoactive or don't directly benefit humans. I mean, all plants benefit humans. They're the base of the fucking food chain. But, that's my hope, is you care about peyote, maybe you start caring about the other plants that it grows with.
Sure. Look at this right here. We got at least a flat of Astrophytum mysterious going on right here.
Oh, wow. So you guys are growing a star cactus.
Well, I am. This is just my personal little project because I care about it. And it is one of those co-companions, and it's overly poached, right?
Oh, and much more threatened than peyote too. It doesn't have that big taproot like peyote has. It's not as resilient in times of drought.
But then again, Astrophytum mysterious doesn't have a church of 400,000 buying 1 million buttons every year to eat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so
good point.
Most of the ones that remain in existence, even if they're sold, are still somewhere growing and making flowers and seeds, but peyote is getting consumed.
This mister is a great way to water too. You're not disturbing. You're applying a large amount of water, respectively, but unlike water directly out of a tap or out of a watering can, it's coming as a mist, so it's not going to disturb the seeds.
Yeah, and it's aerated, so you got that extra boost of oxygen attaching itself, hopefully. Well, my relationship with it has left me feeling that its scheduling with other scheduling substances by law, as if it were a drug, is inappropriate. For me, the first time I had it was a vision quest out in the desert. I was out there for a few days doing that. And I think at the end of 3 days, I drank as much tea as I could stand, ate some fresh buttons. And the sum result was that I gained a hunger for real food, like the idea of growing my own food. Like I was not a big vegetable eater or anything like that. I was raising myself on junk food, 18, 19, 20 years old, out of the house. And it left me feeling a certain way that I didn't even notice. But what the peyote did was it made me feel another way. And what that way felt like was healthy. It just felt like healthy. And it didn't feel artificial. I sensed what was going on with my body for maybe the first time consciously. So it led to this idea of mindfulness of how I'm actually feeling, because even like your gut, let's say, how your gut is feeling, if your tummy is not right, you're not right. It affects your mood. So I noticed that connection. Primarily, that's what happened to me the first time. There was no visual aspect or feeling like I was drugged or high. It was a feeling of health. I thought, well, that's interesting, but I know there's more in there. What's this about? Why is it even legendary or classified as a drug? I was dumb enough and young enough to decide, well, I can't eat a lot of this because of its taste. I still hadn't gotten that palate sorted out for myself. So I ground up powder, put it in triple-aught large capsules, and ate a handful, like 25 of them. And boy, an hour later or so, when I was done purging, I noticed that it was like all the lights came on. And I was able to just lay back and have these beautiful visual pictures presented to me that I still remember, but it left me something like untouched. Emotionally and I guess spiritually, I was just watching a movie. And the message for me was that if you want a movie, go to the movies. But this is not the help you need. This is just something, don't play with it. I almost felt like I had misused it, and I decided, well, I'm not doing that again. I'm going to try to figure out what this plant is really for, if it's for me. And so it's more like it became kind of a part of my diet that I'll eat whenever possible. I ended up with Huichol people in Mexico because I knew they knew something about it. I learned a lot there, and it led me to the Native American Church in the United States, where I've been for a long time. And my use of peyote these days is literally an act of prayer and a mindfulness that doesn't involve anything like what people consider getting messed up on a drug is. For example, in the teepee, there's a person that takes care of the fire. They call that person the fire chief, fireman, or fire person. So that person is the epitome of what you would consider to be sober. Somebody who very mindfully is taking care of hot coals, flame, wood, bringing in long sticks, not hurting anybody and not hurting themselves. This requires a mindfulness that doesn't play games. You mess up, you get burned, or somebody else does. So I'm just saying that that is not what Western culture considers as intoxicated, because it's not. To me, it's more like this idea of mental, spiritual, physiological health that comes upon me when I consume it, if that makes sense.
You had said mindfulness too. It's a very different approach from, this kind of high school kid reactionary nature to the drug war, which is, I want to get my hands, they say don't do it, I want to get my hands on it, I want to get fucked up. The binge drinking attitude, to actually using these compounds from, is in a state of maturity, of adulthood, for tools of self-insight and perspective, to gain something from it instead of just this recreational thing.
Yeah, it's like my generation had the programming from the 40s and 50s and 60s that you use alcohol to get messed up. And that's a good time. And that's how you get your freak on and release your inhibitions and, basically act stupid. It's like lowering your IQ. And then the hippie generation comes along and says, no, man, psychedelics expand your consciousness and da-da-da. And, well, probably the truth is like way more in the middle than people would like to believe. I guess you could abuse peyote by, somehow not paying attention to the message it's given you, or using it without hoping to gain some mindfulness. I consider that kind of sacrilege. Like, I eat the peyote with intent for not wasting it. Whatever message it is, I need to get, and I shouldn't forget. And generally the message goes something like, walking more gently through my life, causing minimal disturbance to the beings around me, doing something about the suffering in the world, treating people nicely. It makes me more sensitive to the little time that I've got to try to be a good person. And so if that's like some kind of weird messed up effect of a drug, then, who's to say? It gives me more sensitivity because I'm kind of an insensitive person. I require a little bit of guidance, a little teacher in my life. I want to have a good example in front of me that I can reach for, and I feel like peyote gives me that every time I eat it. It makes me more sensitive to, like, am I messing up here? Or am I doing something good with what I got left in my life? To me, that's really valuable. That is not psychedelic. That is not intoxicating. that is basically your here now kind of situation.
Back outside, I still can't believe this is all one plant. But again, this used to be common in South Texas. You talk to old timers. I've seen a couple individuals this large in parts of South Texas on private land owned by well-armed people who don't actually use peyote, who just like seeing it. So it'll hopefully never get hit by, harvesters. But this used to be common, and now you rarely see this anymore, right?
Right. I'd love to see something like this. You see them in Mexico, by the way. Not so much north of the border.
What a beautiful plant. I mean, I always tell people, the fact it's psychoactive is the least interesting thing about it. I mean, this plant is just so well adapted to such an extreme environment. It's nuts.
My son is so cute because he'll call home from where he's based in the Army and he'll say, "Hey, Dad, how's my cluster doing? Is it doing good? Is it happy?" That's his relationship.
God, that taproot's got to go down. That's fucking wild. Well, Leo, thank you so much, man. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome, brother.
All right, glad to call you a friend. Thanks again for everything. That's all I got. Have a good rest of your day, everybody. Go fuck yourself. Bye.